A single billionaire finds a poor girl sleeping in the trash. When he hears her story, he falls to his knees crying. Damon Acosta adjusted his cashmere scarf as he exited Lumiere, the most exclusive restaurant downtown. The meal had been excellent, as always, but the company, foreign investors with forced laughter, had left him mentally drained. That was how business worked at his level. Endless dinners with people pretending to like one another. A message from his personal driver blinked on his phone's screen. An unexpected traffic jam would delay him by 15 minutes. Damon put the phone back into his overcoat pocket and decided to walk for a while. The cold night air seemed more appealing than waiting in the restaurant lobby, where he would almost certainly be approached by acquaintances. The bright lights of the main avenue soon gave way to narrower, darker streets. At 32, heading up a financial empire with a fortune estimated in the billions, Damon still carried the instincts of his difficult childhood. He knew which alleys to avoid, where not to make eye contact, how to appear unapproachable. A biting wind blew through the street, making him quicken his pace. That was when he saw it, almost by accident, a small figure among black trash bags piled against the wall of a commercial building. Initially, he thought it might be an animal, perhaps a stray dog looking for shelter from the cold. Something made him stop, a detail out of place, a strand of dark hair visible between the bags. "Oh my God," he murmured, approaching cautiously. It was a child, a girl. She didn't look older than 6, curled up between the trash bags, using one as a makeshift pillow. She wore an oversized sweatshirt, dirty and torn. Her sneakers were tied with mismatched pieces of string, completely worn out. Clutched against her chest was a scorched teddy bear missing an eye, bearing obvious burn marks. Damon froze where he stood. Every day, he saw homeless people. He had learned, as everyone in his social class did, not to look directly at them, to donate money to charities that handled those problems, and then move on with a clear conscience. But here she was, real, immediate, with no filter. "Hey," he called softly. "Hello?" The girl's eyes opened, not with a start, but with a resigned slowness. Dark brown eyes gazed at Damon with an expression that unsettled him deeply. It wasn't a look of fear or hope. It was simply an acknowledgement of his presence, as she might acknowledge the rain or the wind. A look that accepted pain as a normal part of life. "Are you okay?" he asked, realizing how absurd the question was the moment he voiced it. "Where are your parents?" The girl slowly sat up, still hugging the teddy bear. Her eyes drifted around the alley before returning to Damon. "They died," she answered in a clear voice, surprisingly steady. "In the fire." Damon felt a tightness in his chest. A fire. When did that happen? 3 full moons ago, she replied, pointing to the sky. 3 full moons, approximately 3 months, alone, on the streets. "Can you tell me what happened?" Damon asked, crouching to her level and keeping a respectful distance. The girl stroked the scorched teddy bear. "We lived in a little house, on the edge of the city." Her voice was monotonous, as though reciting a story that wasn't hers. "In the poor part, near the old factory." She paused. "The fire started at night. I was sleeping. Dad pulled me out of bed, gave me Mr. Pause, and told me to run to the backyard. Mom was screaming in the kitchen." Her small fingers repeatedly smoothed the scorched ear of the bear. "Dad said he would go get Mom. I waited under the big tree, like we practiced. But the fire got too big. Nobody came out." Damon felt tears forming in his eyes. "How have you been living since then?" he asked, and his voice choked. "On the streets," she answered simply. "I eat whatever I find. Leftover food. Sometimes the people at that restaurant over there leave a sandwich for me." Something broke inside Damon. The child's words hit him with a force that no billion-dollar negotiation, no financial crisis had ever managed. Tears streamed down his face, unbidden and unstoppable. His knees gave way, and he found himself kneeling on the dirty ground of the alley, weeping before a little girl who seemed to accept her fate with a resignation no child should ever know. "What's your name?" he asked between sobs, trying to regain control. "Ellie," she replied, still stroking the teddy bear, "and he's Mr. Pause." Damon swallowed the lump in his throat. "Are you hungry, Ellie?" She didn't answer, but her stomach growled loudly. She squeezed the bear tighter, as if embarrassed. Damon's phone vibrated, his driver, letting him know he'd arrived at the designated spot. Damon looked at the girl, the cold night, the piles of trash. The decision required no thought. "Ellie," he said gently, "I have a big house and with warm food and a comfortable place to sleep. Would you and Mr. Paws like to come with me? Just for tonight, if you'd prefer." The girl watched him for a long moment, as though she could read his intentions. "Why?" she finally asked. The question caught Damon off guard. It was direct, honest, and unsettlingly mature. "Because," he began, unsure how to respond, "because no one should have to sleep on the street, especially a child." Ellie continued observing him, as if processing the information. "Can Mr. Paws come too?" she asked, her voice finally showing a trace of childishness. "Of course he can," Damon replied, feeling fresh tears well up. Ellie stood up slowly. She picked up a small torn backpack from beneath the trash bags, apparently containing everything she had in the world, and held out 3 small fingers for Damon. "Okay," she said simply. The driver kept a neutral expression when Damon appeared with a dirty, ragged child, but his eyes in the rearview mirror betrayed his surprise. He was paid handsomely for his discretion. "Home, sir?" he asked, opening the limousine door. "Yes," Damon replied, helping Ellie inside. The girl looked around the luxurious interior of the car, her eyes widening slightly, the first genuinely childlike reaction she'd shown. "It's like a spaceship," she whispered to the bear, running her hand over the smooth leather seats. During the ride, Ellie remained silent, staring at the city lights through the window. Damon, in turn, couldn't take his eyes off her. He felt he was truly seeing another human being, for the first time in years. The building he lived in occupied an entire block in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city. The duplex penthouse offered a 360-degree view. The doorman, the security guard, and the elevator operator greeted Damon with their usual deference, diplomatically avoiding direct gaze at his small companion. As the private elevator doors opened directly into the apartment's foyer, Ellie finally spoke. "Do you live in the sky?" Damon felt something strange in his chest, a sweet and painful tightening at the same time. "No," he answered gently, "just very high up." The 8,000-square-foot apartment, with its minimalist decor and priceless art, had always been a source of pride for Damon. Now, seeing it through the eyes of that little girl, it seemed cold and artificial. "You must be hungry," he said, guiding Ellie to the kitchen he rarely used. He opened the refrigerator, embarrassed that he didn't know what to offer. There was champagne, caviar, imported cheeses, but nothing that seemed suitable for a child. "What do you like to eat?" he asked. Ellie shrugged. "Anything," she replied. "I'm not picky." Those simple words struck Damon like a new wound. Such a small child shouldn't have learned to be not picky about food. He found pasta, tomato sauce, and grated cheese. He had never cooked in his life, but how hard could it be? While the water boiled, he called his assistant. "Sophia, cancel all my appointments for tomorrow," he said quietly, watching Ellie, who was now placing Mr. Paws on the counter as if he were seated. "All of them. But there's the board meeting and the Japanese investors. No exceptions. And I need you to buy some things for a child. A girl of about 6, clothes, shoes, toys, the basics." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. "A child?" Sophia finally asked. "Yes. And I need everything by morning, as early as possible. Damon, do you have a daughter?" He looked at Ellie, who was now speaking softly to the scorched teddy bear. "No," he replied. "Not yet." Surprisingly, the pasta turned out edible. Ellie ate slowly, taking small, careful bites like someone who had learned to make food last. "There's more if you want," Damon said. Ellie looked at him distrustfully. "Really? Really?" After the meal came bath time. Damon showed her the guest bathroom, larger than many apartments, and explained how the shower worked. "Do you think you can wash yourself?" he asked, uncertain. Ellie nodded. "I've always managed on my own." Another sentence no child should ever have to say. The water ran for a long time. When Ellie finally emerged, wrapped in one of Damon's white t-shirts that fit her like a dress, she was unrecognizable. Her clean face revealed delicate features. Her hair, now visibly brown, fell in damp curls around her shoulders. Mr. Paws looked cleaner, too. "You washed your bear?" Damon asked, surprised. "He was dirty," she replied simply. "We take baths together." Damon led her to the guest bedroom. He prepared the king-size bed, feeling strangely clumsy. "If you need anything during the night, my room is over there, see? The door at the end of the hallway." Ellie nodded, climbing onto the bed with some difficulty. She carefully settled Mr. Paws beside her. "Good night, Ellie," Damon said, heading for the door. "Good night," she replied, already heavy-eyed. "Thanks for the pasta." Damon stood in the doorway long after Ellie had fallen asleep. Watching that small figure lost in the vast bed, her fingers still gripping the teddy bear even in slumber, something had changed, something fundamental. The apartment was still the same. The expensive furniture, the spectacular view, the artificial silence guaranteed by soundproof windows, all unchanged. But Damon was not the same. For the first time in his adult life, perhaps the first time since his own childhood, he felt not the passing annoyance of a failed deal, not the fleeting satisfaction of material success, not the superficial pleasure of brief company. It was something deeper, more genuine, something he didn't know how to name, but instinctively recognized as essential. He remembered the boy he had been, before the money, before the power, before he learned to armor his heart and turn relationships into transactions. That boy would have stopped to help Ellie without hesitation. Sitting in the hallway, Damon cried again, not for what Ellie had lost, but for what he himself had forgotten. And as the sun began to rise over the city, he made a silent promise to the girl sleeping inside and to the boy he had once been. This would be just the first of many nights Ellie would sleep safely. He wouldn't let her go back to the streets, no matter what it took. For the first time in his life, Damon knew with frightening clarity exactly what he wanted. And it wasn't more money, more power, or more recognition. He just wanted to be the kind of person that little girl needed him to be. The sun illuminated the hallway, bathing Damon in its golden light. The house was still the same, but he most certainly was not. The silence of the early morning was broken by a harsh, dry sound. Damon woke immediately, senses on alert. For a moment, he was disoriented in the darkness of his own bedroom, unsure what had disturbed his sleep. Then he heard it again. A cough, small, stifled, as if the person coughing tried to muffle the sound. Ellie. Damon sprang from bed, not bothering with slippers or a robe over his silk pajamas. He hurried down the hallway, guided only by the faint emergency light near the private elevator. The door to the guest room was slightly ajar, just as he had left it a few hours before. He pushed it gently. "Ellie." Another cough, followed by a low moan. Damon turned on the most distant lamp from the bed, letting a soft glow illuminate the room without glaring directly on her. The girl sat in the huge bed, hugging Mr. Paws, her eyes shiny and her face flushed. Even in the dim light, Damon could see beads of sweat on her small forehead. "My throat hurts," she said, her voice raspy. Damon approached and, hesitantly, placed the back of his hand against her forehead. It was hot, very hot. "You have a fever," he noted, feeling a wave of panic he couldn't recall experiencing before. "Not at this level." "Have you felt sick for a while?" Ellie shrugged, a gesture Damon was beginning to recognize as her standard response to many questions. "It gets worse at night," she said simply, which meant it wasn't the first time. She'd likely been feeling ill for days, maybe weeks, sleeping with a fever out in the cold streets. Another wave of coughing shook her fragile body, this time more intense, leaving her gasping. When she finally caught her breath, Ellie looked at Damon with frightened eyes, the first time she had shown genuine fear since he found her. "It hurts to breathe," she confessed. That was all Damon needed to hear. He didn't check the time or worry about the late hour. He simply acted, "We're going to the hospital right now." Ellie clutched Mr. Paws more tightly. "I don't like hospitals," she mumbled, her voice small. "I know," Damon replied, though he had no real way of knowing. "But they'll help you feel better, and I'll be with you the whole time, I promise." He grabbed the nearest blanket and wrapped Ellie in it, creating a protective cocoon around her and the scorched bear. Without a second thought, he lifted her in his arms. She was so light, painfully light. He was already in the hallway, heading for the elevator, when he realized he was still in pajamas, barefoot. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting medical help for Ellie. The private elevator opened directly into the underground garage. The night security guard's eyes widened at the sight of the billionaire barefoot, carrying a child wrapped in a blanket. "Mr. Acosta, is everything—" "My car, now." The guard reacted immediately, opening the door of the black Range Rover parked in the reserved spot. Damon set Ellie carefully in the back seat, making sure the seatbelt protected her without constricting too much. "Which is the closest hospital?" he demanded, taking the wheel himself. "Tell me." "Regional Medical, sir. 3 blocks to the right. Then—" Damon was already speeding up the exit ramp, not bothering with the rest of the directions. He would find the way. He always did. The streets were almost empty at that hour, so they arrived at the ER in under 10 minutes. Damon parked haphazardly near the entrance, unconcerned about possible tickets. Carrying Ellie inside, he headed straight for the triage desk. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "This little girl needs immediate care. She has a high fever and trouble breathing." The nurse on duty glanced up from her computer screen, assessing the unusual scene. A man barefoot, in pajamas, carrying an obviously feverish child wrapped in a cashmere blanket. Her professional gaze quickly took over, and she picked up the internal phone without asking unnecessary questions. "Dr. Mendez, triage, please. Pediatric patient with respiratory difficulty." Within seconds, a small team approached with a gurney. Damon was reluctant to let Ellie go, but he knew he had to trust the professionals. "Remember what I promised," he whispered to the girl. "I'm staying with you the whole time." Ellie nodded weakly, still clutching Mr. Paws as she was placed on the gurney. Her eyes never left Damon's. "Are you the father?" asked the doctor leading the team, already steering the gurney into an exam room. "I'm responsible for her," Damon replied, walking alongside. The doctor gave a small nod, accepting the non-answer for now. There was a patient to treat. "What's her name?" "Ellie. Age?" "Approximately 6 years old." "Any known allergies?" Damon felt his chest tighten. "I don't know." The doctor studied him briefly before turning her attention to Ellie, who was now being hooked up to a vital signs monitor by a nurse. "Ellie, honey, are you allergic to any medicine?" "Anything that makes you feel sick." The girl shook her head, clutching the bear against her chest. "Medical history, previous illnesses." The doctor turned back to Damon. Again, he felt the pain of not knowing. He had met this child less than 24 hours ago. "I'm not aware of anything," he admitted. "But she was homeless until last night." The doctor's expression shifted subtly, a mix of professional understanding and that controlled compassion good physicians develop. "Understood," she said simply, then turned to the nurse. "We'll need a full panel, CBC, CRP, electrolytes, glucose, and a chest X-ray." The next hour was a blur of activity. Damon stayed by Ellie's side through every procedure, holding her small hand while she eyed the needles, masks, and machines with distrust. When she was taken for an X-ray, she was allowed to bring Mr. Paws as long as he stayed out of the exposure area. Finally, they were placed in a small observation room. Ellie was already breathing better, thanks to a nebulizer and fever medication. She was drowsy but fought sleep, as if afraid everything would vanish if she closed her eyes. The doctor returned, now joined by an older man who introduced himself as Dr. Torres, the on-call pediatrician. Both examined a chart of results. Dr. Torres looked inquiringly at Damon. "Acosta, Damon Acosta." A brief flicker of recognition crossed the doctor's face, quickly replaced by professional neutrality. "Mr. Acosta, we need to talk about Ellie's condition. We can do that right here. Or would you prefer somewhere more private?" Damon glanced at Ellie, who was now struggling to keep her eyes open. "Here is fine. I promise not to leave her." The doctor nodded, quietly approving the decision. "Ellie has an early-stage pneumonia, likely the result of an untreated viral infection that worsened. It's not severe yet, thankfully, but it could have become serious quickly without treatment. He paused, allowing Damon to absorb the information. Additionally, she shows signs of moderate malnutrition and multiple vitamin deficiencies. Nothing irreversible, but concerning for a child in a crucial developmental phase. Damon nodded, each word hitting like a blow. Even knowing she had been living on the streets, hearing the clinical impact was devastating. There are also, the doctor hesitated, lowering his voice, some signs of old physical trauma, small fractures that healed without proper medical attention, a toe that was broken and never treated, some scars. Damon closed his eyes briefly, fighting a wave of anger. Not at the doctor, but at a world where a child could suffer like this. Toxicology is clean, which is good news, Dr. Torres continued. And despite everything, her kidney and liver function are normal. Children can be incredibly resilient. Ellie had finally drifted into sleep, still clutching the bear. The oxygen mask created little clouds of condensation with each breath. "What's the treatment?" Damon asked, keeping his voice low so as not to wake her. "Antibiotics for the pneumonia, vitamin supplements for nutritional deficiencies, and plenty of rest. I'd like to keep her in observation at least until tomorrow afternoon." Damon agreed with a nod. "Mr. Acosta?" The doctor hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Under normal circumstances, with a vulnerable child and no clear custody documentation, we'd be required to notify Child Protective Services immediately." Damon felt his body tense, preparing for the battle he knew would eventually come, but had hoped to delay until he had a concrete plan. The doctor continued, "However, I see you have a genuine interest in her well-being. May I ask what exactly your relationship to Ellie is?" Damon glanced at the sleeping girl, at the face that even in slumber held an expression of someone who had seen far too much far too soon. "I found her last night," he replied honestly, "sleeping among trash bags, hugging that bear. She told me about the fire that killed her parents, about surviving on the streets." He took a deep breath before continuing, "I couldn't leave her there. I just couldn't." The doctor studied Damon's face for a long moment. Whatever initial reservations he had, something in Damon's expression seemed to reassure him. "Is she your daughter?" he finally asked, direct but without judgment. Damon looked at Ellie again, an answer formed in his heart before he could think it through logically. "Not yet," he said with surprising certainty, "but she's with me." The words hung in the air, laden with meaning, a declaration, a promise. Dr. Torres nodded slowly. "I understand. Well, legally, I will still need to file a report, but I'll note that Ellie is under your temporary care while formal steps are taken." He gave Damon a small smile. "That should give you some time to arrange the situation." Damon felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Doctor. Just take good care of her," the doctor replied, heading toward the door. "Kids like Ellie have already seen the worst the world can offer. It's time they see the best." The next morning, Ellie woke up noticeably better. Her fever had subsided, and her breathing, though still a bit rough, was easier. Damon, who had slept in a chair by her bed without leaving her side for a moment, immediately perked up. "Good morning," he said with a tired smile. Ellie glanced around, disoriented for a moment, before recognizing Damon. Her eyes widened in surprise. "You really stayed," she murmured. "I promised, didn't I?" Damon answered, feeling a lump in his throat. How could something as simple as keeping a promise mean so much to her? A nurse came in with a breakfast tray, a small bowl of oatmeal, toast, jam, a glass of orange juice, and a cup of tea with milk. She placed it on the bed tray and adjusted the bed so Ellie could eat upright. "Enjoy, princess," she said with a warm smile. "If you need anything, just let us know." Damon thanked her, then turned his attention to Ellie, who was staring at the tray as though it contained priceless treasures. "All this is for me?" she asked, incredulous. "All yours," Damon confirmed, helping her position the tray. "I'll get myself a coffee at the cafeteria later." Ellie was already stirring the oatmeal, tasting it cautiously, as if afraid it might vanish. "It's good," she noted, surprised. "Tastes like real milk." Damon watched her eat, each small bite carefully chewed. Even hungry, she ate with a restraint no 6-year-old should ever need to have. Meanwhile, Damon's assistant had arranged for clothes and personal items for both of them. A company security officer had dropped everything off at the hospital reception early that morning. At least now, Damon was properly dressed and no longer barefoot. Ellie finished half the oatmeal, a whole slice of toast and all the juice before pushing the tray away. "I can't eat more," she said, gently nudging the tray. "My stomach's too small." The comment, made so naturally, struck Damon like a bullet. Her stomach was small because she was used to having far too little for far too long. "That's fine," he reassured her, removing the tray. "You can eat more whenever you feel hungry again." Ellie nodded, leaning back against the pillows, still clutching Mr. Paws. She looked like she wanted to say something but hesitated. "What is it?" Damon asked gently. She bit her lip, pondering. "Can I tell you something?" "Anything," Damon replied, leaning in closer. Ellie stared at her own hands for a moment before speaking. "There were days I went to sleep hungry," she said with that disarming childhood frankness. "I used to draw pictures in my mind to forget." Damon felt his heart clench. "Draw in your mind." She nodded. "It's when you close your eyes and pretend you're drawing pretty things. I drew flowers at Pambu and the sun, and a new house." She paused, her fingers absently stroking the bear's scorched ear. "But what I really wanted was to go to school," she continued, voice soft but clear. "To learn my whole name." Damon, who had just picked up his coffee cup, felt his fingers grip it so tightly he feared it would break. "How your whole name?" he asked, once he trusted himself to speak again. Ellie nodded. "I only know how to write Ellie. Mom started teaching me, but we didn't have time to finish." Her eyes lifted to meet Damon's. "My name is Eleanor, but it's hard to write." Eleanor, a little girl with such an elegant name, sleeping among trash bags. Her words echoed in Damon's mind. Harder, more real, more impactful than any advice he'd ever heard in billion-dollar boardrooms, more meaningful than any motivational speech costing thousands of dollars. A child who drew in her mind to forget hunger, who dreamt not of toys or treats, but of something as basic as learning to write her own name. At that moment, any residual doubt Damon might have harbored vanished completely. He hadn't simply decided to help Ellie. He'd decided to rebuild her world, give her everything she deserved, and he had no doubt she was staying, not just temporarily, not just until a more proper solution was found. She was staying with him, permanently, because now he understood, with crystal clarity, that he needed her as much as she needed him. In the quiet of the hospital room, as Ellie drifted back to sleep, safe and medicated, Damon made another silent vow. Eleanor, her full name, her entire name, would be the first of many lessons, and he would stand by her every step of the way. Later that morning, the department store was opened exclusively for them. Damon had insisted. He didn't want Ellie exposed to crowds, nor did he want to turn the experience into a spectacle for curious onlookers who might recognize the billionaire with a child. Ellie, recently discharged from the hospital, still coughed occasionally. Her small body needed time to recover its strength. Damon, meanwhile, juggled urgent video calls with his unwavering dedication to the girl who had changed his world in just a few days. "What do you think of this?" he asked, holding up a navy blue dress with little white stars embroidered on it. Ellie observed the piece with cautious interest, touching the fabric as if testing its reality. Her fingers traced the embroidered stars with silent reverence. The next 2 hours were a discovery for both of them. Damon had never helped a child pick out clothes. Ellie had never had the chance to try on new clothes, much less choose what she actually liked. At first, she accepted everything without protest. Damon had to watch her carefully to see what genuinely appealed to her, an extra sparkle in her eyes, a slight smile, fingers lingering over a particular fabric. "We don't have to buy everything," he said gently, realizing how large their pile of chosen items had grown. "Only what you really like." That was when Ellie finally gathered the courage to speak up. "Can I pick one thing I really, really want?" "Of course," Damon replied. "What is it?" Ellie shyly pointed to a pair of purple sneakers with little lights that blinked with each step. "They glow," she explained, as though she needed to justify her desire. Damon felt a knot in his throat, a pair of light-up sneakers. So simple, so common for most children, a basic joy Ellie had never experienced. "We'll buy every model they have," he told the sales assistant, then knelt to help Ellie try on the purple pair. The girl's eyes widened as she took her first steps and saw the tiny lights flashing. A smile, the first truly spontaneous one Damon had seen, lit up her face. "Look, Mr. Paws," she exclaimed to the teddy bear who remained her inseparable companion. "We're glowing." From clothes and shoes, they moved on to the toy section. Damon dismissed the help of the store clerks. He wanted to watch Ellie, to see what truly caught her attention, without interference. The girl walked slowly down the aisles, eyes wide. She stopped in front of a shelf of stuffed animals. "They're new," she observed with a wisdom beyond her age. "Mr. Paws is old, but he knows more stories." Damon smiled. "Mr. Paws is special, but maybe he'd like some friends." Ellie considered the idea seriously. Finally, she chose a grey elephant with a gentle expression. "He looks kind," she explained. "He can be friends with Mr. Paws." From stuffed animals, they moved on to games and puzzles. Ellie showed particular interest in colourful building blocks and a box of crayons. "Do you like to draw?" Damon asked. "Never did it for real," she replied. "Only in my mind." Those words, which Ellie said so naturally, hit Damon hard. He remembered her confession at the hospital, how she drew in her mind to forget her hunger. "Then we'll get you all the supplies you need to draw for real," he declared, adding sketchbooks, coloured pencils, paints and brushes to the already overflowing cart. In the children's book section, Ellie grew especially quiet. She touched the brightly coloured covers with reverent care. "Do you like stories?" Damon asked. Ellie nodded. "Mom used to read to me. I can't read by myself yet." "I can read to you," Damon offered, "until you learn." For the first time, Ellie picked something off the shelf without asking. A book featuring a girl and a bear on an adventure through a forest on the cover. "He looks like Mr. Paws," she explained, showing him the illustration, from one book to many, from building blocks to educational games, and more clothes. The shopping trip became a journey of discovery. The cart was replaced by 2, then 3, until employees had to begin packing items into large bags. On the way home, Damon noticed Ellie kept her face close to the car window, watching the streets with particular attention. "What are you looking at?" he asked gently. "The people," she answered simply. "So many are sleeping outside." Damon followed her gaze. Indeed, a few homeless individuals were visible on that stretch of road, people he had likely passed hundreds of times without truly noticing. "Yes," he agreed, unsure what else to say. "That lady," Ellie pointed to an elderly woman sitting on a piece of cardboard on the sidewalk. "She used to give me a slice of bread whenever she had some." Damon felt a pang in his chest. The girl recognized people she had encountered during her months on the streets. People who, with the little they had shown kindness to an abandoned child. He ordered the driver to stop. Before Ellie could ask why, Damon got out of the car and walked over to the woman. He spoke to her briefly, placed something in her hand, and returned to the vehicle. "What did you give her?" Ellie asked, curious. "Enough money for a place to stay for a few weeks," he answered honestly, "and my card, so she can contact me if she needs more help." Ellie nodded, as if it made perfect sense. "She's kind," Ellie affirmed. "She always shared, even when she didn't have much." The rest of the ride was punctuated by similar observations. Ellie discreetly pointed out specific people: a senior man with a skinny dog, a young mother begging with a baby in her arms, a teenager sleeping in a building entrance. She had a story for each. The old man had once shared a can of tuna with her. The young mother let her sit beside them on days of heavy rain, sheltering under a small store awning. The teenager had shown her the best places to find still edible discarded food. Damon listened silently, seeing his city, her city, through Ellie's eyes. A city of invisible connections among the forgotten. A network of solidarity among those society preferred not to see. When they arrived home, the packages were laid out in the living room. "Ellie," still wearing her purple light-up sneakers, looked at the mountain of bags with an expression somewhere between wonder and confusion. "It's all mine." "All yours," Damon confirmed. With heartbreaking caution, the girl began opening the packages. Instead of the eagerness one would expect from a child faced with so many new toys, she examined each item carefully, as if wanting to memorize every detail. Gradually, the toys began occupying the large Persian rug in the living room. Colorful blocks turned into towers. Stuffed animals were arranged in a circle, like a solemn gathering. Books were stacked by size. Damon, seated on the sofa, watched with a smile. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cancelled so many appointments in a row, or the last time he'd spent so much time at home. And, surprisingly, he didn't miss the adrenaline of meetings, negotiations, and professional achievements. He was completely absorbed in the transformation happening right there on his imported rug, the transformation of Ellie from a street child into simply a child. Suddenly, he noticed she was watching him. There was something different in her eyes now, an unspoken question. Ellie stood up, holding a box of building blocks. She walked over to him, her sneakers flashing with each step, and held out her small hand. "You can play too," she said, her voice an earnest invitation. Damon looked at that outstretched hand, at the face that, for the first time since they'd met, truly looked childlike in its hopeful expression. Without hesitation, he set his phone aside and slid off the sofa to join her on the rug, kneeling beside her. "What are we going to build?" he asked. "A house," Ellie replied, already sorting blocks by color. "A really big one, for all of us." "All of us?" "Me, you, Mr. Paws," she explained, arranging the blocks with adorable seriousness. "And all our new friends." Damon found himself completely immersed in the game. They built a house first, then a tower, then a bridge, structures that had no name but made Ellie smile each time Damon added something unexpected. Without noticing, an hour passed, then two. The afternoon sun cast colorful reflections through the penthouse's large windows, painting the rug with patches of light that seemed part of their game. Then, as he watched Ellie carefully place a blue block on top of their joint creation, Damon felt something strange in his chest, a warmth and expansion as though his heart had learned a new rhythm. He realized it with crystal clarity that he had never felt anything like this. Not during major professional achievements, not in million-dollar acquisitions, not in nights at exclusive resorts. There, kneeling on a rug, building a castle of colorful blocks with a little girl fate had put in his path. Damon finally understood. Genuine affection lives in the simple things. It lives in sneakers that light up, in block castles, in shy smiles, in tiny hands inviting you to play. In the following days, after Ellie's complete recovery, Damon decided it was time to introduce her to the world beyond his apartment. Part of him dreaded this moment, the collision between the protective bubble he'd created for her and the reality of the city. They started with walks in the park. Ellie, initially timid in open spaces, soon discovered the joy of swings and slides. Watching her play among other children, hesitant yet increasingly confident, brought Damon a satisfaction he couldn't quite name. It was during the return from one of those outings, following a different route at Ellie's request, that they passed through a more modest part of the city. The girl clung firmly to Damon's hand, leading him as though she had a specific destination in mind. They stopped in front of a small, simple-looking diner. Through the window, they could see a middle-aged man working in the kitchen. "Mr. Carlos," Ellie explained, pointing. "He used to leave sandwiches for me at the end of the day." Damon studied the diner, clearly a family-owned business, struggling to stay afloat. The kind of place he'd never have gone to, the kind of person he'd never have met. "Shall we go in?" he suggested. Ellie's eyes widened. "Can we?" "Of course." The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The man in the kitchen looked up reflexively, still chopping vegetables. Then he paused, looking more closely. "Little Ellie?" he called out, incredulous. Ellie offered a shy smile, partially hiding behind Damon's legs. "Hi, Mr. Carlos?" The man set down his knife and approached, a genuine smile lighting up his tired face. "I thought you'd gone away. It's been weeks since you last came by. I was worried." Damon felt a knot in his throat. This stranger, this man barely making it with his small diner, had worried about Ellie, had noticed her absence. "She's with me now," Damon spoke up, extending his hand. "I'm Damon Acosta." The man wiped his hands on his apron before shaking Damon's. "Carlos Mendez, pleasure to meet you." Over the next 20 minutes, Damon listened as Carlos recounted how he always left a wrapped sandwich near the dumpster behind the diner, in a specific spot where Ellie could find it. How sometimes he'd include fruit or chocolate. How on nights of heavy rain, he pretended not to see her sleeping under the small covered area by the back entrance. Before leaving, Damon insisted on paying for a year's worth of lunches for needy children in the area, meals Carlos already provided whenever he could, but that he could now offer daily without hurting his business. It was just the first of many similar encounters. In the following weeks, guided by Ellie, Damon discovered a city he'd never really seen. The fruit stand lady, who sometimes let a piece of fruit fall so Ellie could pick it up. The doorman of a commercial building who let her use the staff restroom. Small acts of kindness, simple gestures of humanity. An invisible network of support that had kept Ellie alive when all official systems failed her. And with each encounter, each story, Damon felt himself changing. It was as though layers of indifference cultivated over years of privilege were being peeled away one by one. The homeless people he used to overlook now had faces, names, stories. The poor neighborhoods he once saw merely as statistics in reports were now real communities, full of people struggling, surviving, caring for one another. One afternoon, as they headed back from another eye-opening stroll, they passed a group of people sleeping under a bridge. Ellie squeezed Damon's hand. "She's new," Ellie whispered, pointing to a young woman curled up in a corner away from the others. "She wasn't here before." Damon looked at the woman. She couldn't have been older than 20. She was shivering, even though it wasn't particularly cold. "How do you know she's new?" "She's scared," Ellie explained, with that sharp perception of street dynamics. "She hasn't learned yet." Before, Damon would have walked right past, would have thought, "Not my problem. It's the government's problem, or the charities, or anyone's but mine." Now he stopped. He truly looked at the woman, and he thought, this could have been Ellie. In another world, in different circumstances, it could be Ellie there, alone, shivering. "Wait here a moment," he said, approaching the woman. The conversation was brief. She was pregnant. She had fled an abusive relationship. She had nowhere to go. With a few phone calls, Damon secured her a spot in a shelter, specializing in helping women facing domestic violence. He arranged transportation, ensured she got medical care for her pregnancy. When he returned to Ellie, he found her watching calmly. "You helped," she observed, not as a question but as a statement. "Yes," Damon replied. "I tried." Ellie nodded, satisfied, then took his hand again as they continued on their way. On the drive home, Damon realized something fundamental had changed within him. The city, with all its injustices and inequalities, was no longer just a distant backdrop he passed through in a bulletproof car. Now, everything felt like his responsibility. Every vulnerable person, every child without access to education, every family without a decent home, they were all part of a new moral equation in his life. Because any of them, absolutely any, could have been Ellie. And Ellie, in just a few weeks, had become everything. Damon woke with a start, unsure what had interrupted his sleep. He blinked into the darkness of his room, trying to figure out what had awakened him. The digital clock by his bed read 3:17 a.m. For a moment, he thought he'd been dreaming. A nightmare, perhaps, the kind that fades upon waking, leaving only unease. He was about to roll over and go back to sleep when he heard it. A scream, high-pitched, desperate. "Ellie!" He leapt out of bed as if shocked, not bothering with slippers. In seconds, he was running down the hallway toward the girls' room, guided only by the faint emergency light near the elevator. Another scream cut through the quiet of the night. "Dad, get me out of the fire." The words spurred Damon to run faster, his heart pounding against his ribs. He shoved the door so hard it banged against the wall. In the soft glow of the little lamp they left on, Ellie couldn't sleep in complete darkness since the fire. Damon saw her sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror, but not really seeing what was in front of her. Mr. Paws had fallen on the floor, as if thrown aside in the chaos. "Dad!" she screamed again, her small hands flailing as though pushing away something invisible. "It's burning! Get me out!" Damon crossed the room in 2 long strides and sat on the edge of the bed. When he touched her shoulder, he realized her nightshirt was soaked with sweat. Her hair clung to her forehead and temples. "Ellie," he said softly, trying to pull her out of whatever nightmare she was trapped in. "Ellie, it's me." "Damon," but she remained locked in the dream, eyes open but unseeing, reliving the flames of a memory that refused to fade. "It's hot," she murmured, now trembling uncontrollably. "Everything's on fire." Damon gripped her small shoulders, firmly but gently. "Eleanor," he said, using her full name, which he rarely did. "Wake up. You're safe." It was a nightmare. Finally, her eyes seemed to focus. She blinked several times, as if adjusting to reality, leaving the nightmare world behind. When she recognized Damon, her face twisted into a mix of relief and profound hurt. So strong he felt it physically in his own chest. "Damon!" she whispered, voice raw from screaming. I saw the fire again. Then, without warning, she flung herself at him, throwing her arms around his neck and clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. Damon hugged her back, feeling her fragile body shake against his. He could count every rib through the thin nightshirt. A reminder that, despite weeks of proper meals, Ellie's body still bore signs of prolonged deprivation. "They couldn't get out," she mumbled into his shoulder, words muffled and broken by sobs. "I called them, but they didn't come." Damon closed his eyes, feeling his own throat tighten. It was the first time Ellie had spoken so directly about the trauma of the fire since that first night in the alley, as if the nightmare had shattered some internal barrier. "I know," he whispered, stroking her damp hair. "I know, sweet girl." What else could he say? No phrase or generic comfort could ease the depth of her loss. So instead of more words, he simply held her. Let her cry against his chest. Let her tremble in his arms. Let her release the terror that had built up in a child who had watched her world burn. Gradually, the gut-wrenching sobs turned to spaced hiccups. Her breathing, once ragged, began to even out. But her small fingers remained locked in his t-shirt, as if afraid he too might disappear. Damon reached for Mr. Paws, who lay on the floor, and placed him gently between them. "Look who's worried about you," he said softly. Ellie looked at the scorched teddy bear, her constant companion on the streets, her last link to her old life. "He has nightmares sometimes too," she murmured, stroking the bear's ear with trembling fingers. "Sometimes he cries softly when he thinks I'm asleep." Damon felt something break inside him. Ellie's sensitivity, even in her own suffering, her ability to project and care for a toy's feelings, because it was easier to deal with the bear's sorrow than her own. "You know what?" he said, adjusting the sweat-soaked pillow. "I think you both need to sleep somewhere safer tonight." Ellie lifted her eyes to him, questioning, "How about you two sleep in my room? My bed is huge for just one person. That way, if the nightmare comes back, I'll be there to chase it away." The girl nodded slowly, relief evident on her exhausted face. Damon scooped her up effortlessly, along with Mr. Paws and her favorite blanket, a soft light blue one she had personally picked out at the store. Ellie rested her head on his shoulder, eyes heavy with exhaustion and emotion. On the way to his room, Damon reflected on how much his life had changed in a matter of weeks. It had been years since anyone else slept in his bed. The few women who had passed through never stayed for breakfast, let alone midnight comfort after a nightmare. Now, he was carrying a frightened child to sleep by his side, and nothing in the world felt more necessary or natural. He laid Ellie down on the right side of the king-size bed, set Mr. Paws beside her, and pulled the covers gently over her. "I'm going to get you a glass of water," he said, realizing she was likely dehydrated after so much crying. But when he started to pull away, her small hand grasped his fingers with surprising strength. "Don't go," she whispered, fear returning to her eyes. "Stay here." Damon hesitated only a second before giving in. He sat on the edge of the bed and held her hand in his. "You're safe. he said, mustering all the conviction he could. "I'm here, I promise." Ellie studied him carefully, as though weighing that promise. Finally, with a soft sigh, she closed her eyes. Her fingers, however, stayed firmly around his, like an anchor to reality. Damon remained like that, seated on the edge of the bed, holding Ellie's hand, until her breathing deepened into sleep. Even then, he didn't let go. Instead, carefully, he lay down beside her, keeping his hold on her small hand. In that space between waking and sleep, he had a clarity he'd never experienced. This girl, this small hand in his, this absolute trust was all that mattered. Not the billion-dollar contracts, not the hostile takeovers, not the corporate empire he'd built. None of it compared to the responsibility of keeping that one promise. "I'm here." He remembered how he had found her in that dark alley, sleeping among trash bags. How she had survived alone for months, hiding, scavenging, braving cold and fear. How, in spite of it all, she could still smile when her shoes lit up, still worry about a teddy bear's feelings, still trust someone again. And he knew, with a certainty that transcended any rational thought, that he would never let go. That he would do whatever it took to ensure this extraordinary survivor never faced the world alone again. Ellie shifted in her sleep, snuggling closer to him, still holding tight to his hand. And Damon, once labeled a ruthless strategist by the business press, who sealed billion-dollar deals without blinking, discovered he was prepared to rearrange the entire universe for this little person sleeping beside him. She slept in his arms, and he did not let go. After that night of nightmares, Damon couldn't bring himself to return to work the next day. For the first time in years, he cancelled all his meetings without giving much explanation. Sophia, his assistant, had to juggle excuses for important clients and partners while her boss stayed home, sitting at the edge of a child's bed, watching Ellie sleep. Her breathing had normalized, but the terror of the previous night lingered like an invisible presence in the room. Damon couldn't shake the image of Ellie screaming for her father amidst the flames of a traumatic memory. When he finally resumed his routine 2 days later, he did something he never imagined. He completely reorganized his schedule to be home every night before 8. Eating dinner with Ellie, helping her bathe, reading a bedtime story. Those moments became non-negotiable in his calendar. "Damon, you know we can't postpone the meeting with the Japanese again," Sophia warned, entering his office with a pile of folders. "They've rescheduled twice already and are starting to suspect something's wrong with the deal." Damon tapped his fingers on the desk, glancing at the clock. It was 6:15. "Schedule it for tomorrow, 9 in the morning," he replied, shutting his laptop. "I need to go home." The entire office was buzzing with rumors about the change. The once relentless Damon Acosta, who used to work late into the night and demanded the same from his team, now had strict departure times. Speculation ran wild, a serious illness perhaps, a secret affair. The truth, which few knew yet, was far more transformative. Damon was in the process of securing temporary custody of a little girl he'd found on the streets. "The papers are ready," Helena Martinez, his lawyer, announced that morning, handing him a folder. "The hearing is set for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Judge Henderson is known for being thorough, but we have a solid case. The medical, psychological, and social reports are all in our favor." What if he denies it? Damon voiced the fear that had haunted him for weeks. Helena regarded him over her glasses. "He won't. But if the unexpected happens, we'll fight. You have the resources for that." Damon nodded, closing the folder. He wasn't used to situations where his money and influence couldn't guarantee the outcome. The uncertainty of the process, the possibility, however small, of losing Ellie, provoked an anxiety he'd never felt in multi-million-dollar deals. He decided not to tell Ellie about the hearing. He didn't want to raise her hopes or, worse, spark fears. Ellie was finally starting to feel safe, to believe that her place with Damon wasn't temporary. He didn't want to endanger that fragile sense of security. On the morning of the hearing, he woke earlier than usual. He chose his most conservative suit, no ostentation today, and triple-checked that every document was in order. Entering the kitchen, he found Ellie already seated, playing with her breakfast cereal. "Good morning," he greeted, unable to hide the nervousness in his voice. Ellie looked up at him, that disconcerting perceptiveness shining in her gaze. "You're going somewhere important," she stated, not a question. Damon hesitated. He had underestimated her ability to read situations. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I have a very important meeting today." "Is it about me?" she asked, lowering her spoon. Damon's brief silence answered for him. "It's so I can stay here for real." Ellie pressed, her eyes now locked on his, a mix of hope and fear. "Yes," Damon conceded, sitting down across from her. "Our judge is going to officially say you can live with me." Ellie processed this, stirring her cereal absent-mindedly. What if he says no? The same question that tormented Damon. "He won't," Damon said with more confidence than he felt. "But even if he does, we'll keep trying. I promise I won't give up, Ellie." She nodded slowly, seeming satisfied with the answer. Then, to Damon's surprise, she extended her small hand across the table. "Good luck," she said seriously. Damon took that tiny hand and felt a fierce determination surge within him. He would fight the entire system if needed. The hearing turned out to be surprisingly brief. Judge Henderson, a stern-looking man with grey hair, asked direct questions and carefully reviewed the reports. He listened to the social workers, the psychologist working with Ellie, and Damon himself. "Mr. Acosta," the judge finally said, "this court grants temporary custody of the minor Eleanor Santos to you for 6 months, after which we will reassess for a decision on permanent guardianship. Monthly progress reports are required." Damon felt a wave of relief so intense he feared his legs might buckle. Temporary custody. The first official step. Legal recognition of something his heart already knew. Returning home, he found Sophia waiting in the lobby, looking urgent. "The video conference with Los Angeles started 20 minutes ago," she informed him, handing over a folder. "The board is waiting. It's the vote on the TechVision acquisition." The TechVision acquisition. The deal Damon had been crafting for months. $4 billion. A transaction that would shape the entire next fiscal year. "I'm on my way," he replied automatically, taking the folder. He rode the elevator up to the penthouse, finding Ellie in the living room, drawing. When she saw him, her face lit up. "What did the judge say?" she asked, setting down her colored pencils. "He said yes," Damon smiled. "You stay with me." Ellie's smile, once so rare, now becoming more frequent, spread across her face, but it soon grew serious again. "You have to work now?" she asked, noticing the folder in his hands. "Yes, I have a very important meeting," Damon explained. "Lisa, your babysitter, will stay with you." Ellie nodded, returning to her drawing with a resigned acceptance unbefitting such a young child. She was used to not being anyone's priority, not demanding attention, not minding when she was left behind. Damon felt a pang in his chest. He remembered the night of her nightmare, the promise he'd made. "I'm here." "Ellie," he called, placing the folder on the table. "What do you want to do today?" She looked up at him, puzzled. "Don't you have a meeting?" "I do, but—" He hesitated, then asked, "Do you want me to stay with you today?" Ellie's eyes widened for a moment, caution soon returning. "Can you stay with me today?" she asked, voice small, testing this new possibility as if she didn't quite believe it. Damon glanced at the folder containing months of work, at the phone vibrating with urgency, at the corporate empire demanding his constant presence. Then he looked at Ellie, at the eyes that had seen the worst of the world, yet still held the capacity to trust. At the tiny hands gripping colored pencils like they were treasures. "Yes," he said, with a certainty that surprised him. "I can stay with you today." He called Sophia. "Cancel the video conference. Tell the board to vote without me or reschedule for next week." "Damon, this is TechVision. You've worked on this. I know exactly what it is," he interrupted softly. "And I know the company will survive without me for a day. Today I have something more important." He hung up and put the phone on silent. "So where do we go?" Ellie asked, still seeming unsure. "Anywhere you want," Damon answered. This is our day. They spent the afternoon at the park, ate burgers at a humble diner, something Damon hadn't done in decades, visited the zoo, and finished the day watching the sunset from a bench by the lake. As Ellie fed breadcrumbs to the ducks, her face bathed in the setting sun's glow. Damon glanced quickly at his phone. Dozens of missed calls, urgent emails. A postponed vote, dipping stock prices. At any other time in his life, this would have been considered a disastrous day. But watching Ellie, peaceful as she fed the ducks, Damon knew he had made the right choice. Emails could wait. Meetings would be rescheduled. Stocks would recover. This moment would not come again. As he mentally reorganized his life, his commitments, his priorities, Damon realized a fundamental truth. Being a father wasn't just about providing shelter, food, and safety. It was about learning to choose heart over spreadsheets, love over logic, the present moment over strategic planning. And for the first time, he understood why this wasn't a sacrifice, it was a privilege. The idea took shape in Damon's mind during his walks with Ellie around the city. The girl, now more confident by his side, began pointing out places and people who had been part of her street life. "That's where Mr. John sleeps," she'd explain, pointing to a gap between two commercial buildings. "He shared his cardboard with me when it got really cold." Or, "The flower lady let me stay near her stand when it rained a lot. She said I scared away thieves." Each story revealed an invisible network of solidarity, small gestures that kept Ellie alive during those months of abandonment. People who, despite having little on, still shared what they had. After one of these walks, Damon spent the entire night awake, planning. By dawn, he had the outline of a project in mind. "I want to buy the old textile factory building on Palmer Street," he announced to Eduardo Villas, his COO, the next day. "That one in the rundown industrial district?" Eduardo asked, confused. "That area has little commercial value and—" "It's not going to be a commercial venture," Damon interrupted. "It will be the headquarters of the Aurora Foundation." In the following weeks, the project took shape at a speed only Damon's virtually unlimited resources could manage. Architects, engineers, social workers, and medical professionals were consulted. The abandoned building, once a symbol of urban decline, began its transformation. The foundation will provide temporary shelter with individual and family rooms, 3 daily meals, basic medical care, legal assistance, and job training programs, Damon explained to the hired team. "I want it to be a place of dignity, not just charity." Word spread quickly that the reclusive billionaire Damon Acosta was investing a fortune in a social project. The same journalists who had once speculated about his personal life now questioned his sudden philanthropic interest. Damon ignored the questions, the speculation, the interview requests. To him, the foundation wasn't a PR stunt or a way to appease his conscience. It was a natural extension of the transformation Ellie had sparked within him. At home, he talked to Ellie about the project, showing her the plans in ways she could understand. "It'll be a place where people can take a shower and sleep in real beds?" she asked, studying the architectural models with bright eyes. "Yes, and also get medical care, learn new job skills, solve paperwork issues," Damon explained. "A place to start over." Ellie nodded thoughtfully. Like Mr. John, he could go there. "He has a dog." The question made Damon realize something none of his consultants had mentioned: how important pets can be to people experiencing homelessness. Many refuse shelters because they can't bring their companions. "Yes, he could," Damon replied. "And his dog would be welcome too." The next day, a new addition was made to the project, a pet-friendly area with basic veterinary care. That was how the dynamic worked between them. Ellie, with her direct experience and unique perspective, identified needs that experts with years of study overlooked. And Damon, with his resources, turned those observations into tangible solutions. When the architectural designs were finalized, Damon brought home the final blueprints to show Ellie. They sat at the dining room table, where she spent hours drawing, a therapeutic activity for her. "What do you think?" he asked, laying out the colorful plans. Ellie studied them attentively, her small fingers tracing the outlines of the planned spaces. "It looks nice," she finally said, "but something's missing." "What?" Damon asked, intrigued. Ellie didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up a blank sheet and began to draw. Damon watched silently as she concentrated, tongue sticking out a bit while she switched between colored pencils. Half an hour later, she held up the finished drawing. "Like this," she announced. It was a house. Not an architecturally accurate rendering, but the universal concept of home children draw. A rectangle with a triangular roof, square windows with curtains, a chimney with smoke, and flowers out front. On the door, in careful writing, the word "Welcome." Damon stared at the drawing for a long time. It was simple, childlike, and somehow more perfect than any polished plans he'd commissioned. "That's exactly what it was missing," he finally agreed. "Can we use it?" Ellie nodded, handing him the drawing with solemn care. On the morning of the official press conference to announce the Aurora Foundation, Damon's office received a special delivery. Ellie's drawing, now framed in a simple yet elegant frame. Without fanfare, he placed it in the center of the stage where the announcement would be held. When journalists and guests arrived, many wondered why a child's drawing hung among sophisticated scale models and high-tech presentations. Damon offered no explanation at first. Only when he took the microphone did he connect the dots. "The Aurora Foundation was born from a simple question," he began. "Why do we allow people to live on the streets in one of the wealthiest cities in the country? Why do we accept this as normal?" He paused, looking at the framed drawing. "It took a child to show me what had been in front of my eyes for decades, to teach me to see not just abstract problems, but real people. To remind me that effective solutions begin with something as simple as an open door and a single word, welcome." Camera flashes captured the moment Damon touched the frame reverently. No one in the auditorium fully grasped the personal transformation that gesture symbolized. The headlines the next day focused on the millions invested, the innovative architecture, the pioneering programs the foundation would implement. They speculated on Damon Acosta's motives behind his philanthropic turn. None captured the simple truth Damon now knew with absolute certainty. The Aurora Foundation hadn't been born out of guilt, charity, or a corporate strategy. It wasn't born of statistics or studies on social inequality. It hadn't even been born solely from his own personal transformation. Its mission had grown from the love of a child who, having known the worst of humanity, could still draw open doors and write welcome. A child who, even after sleeping among trash bags, dreamed of homes where everyone was safe. That night, after the media frenzy died down, Damon found Ellie waiting at home. She greeted him with the question she always asked after his absences. "Did everything go okay?" "Yes," he answered, sitting beside her. "Thanks to your drawing." Ellie smiled, that smile growing less rare every day. "You're going to help a lot of people, right?" "We are," Damon corrected. "This project is just as much yours as it is mine." The girl nodded, satisfied, and went back to her new drawing, another house, another garden, another world where everyone was welcome. And Damon realized, watching her, that he had received far more than he had ever given. In trying to save Ellie, he had found his own salvation. The official envelope arrived on an otherwise ordinary Wednesday, while Damon was reviewing expansion plans for the Aurora Foundation. The family court letterhead made it stand out from the usual correspondence. New hearing date for re-evaluation of the temporary custody of Eleanor Santos. 6 months had passed quickly, 6 months of transformations, lessons, and small daily victories. Ellie's first day attending any form of school, her first birthday party, the first time she said goodnight without fear of the nightmares returning. Damon had known this moment would come. Temporary custody had always been just the first step. Now the system wanted to see if he was suitable as Ellie's permanent guardian and, potentially, her adoptive father. "Mr. Acosta, do you have a minute?" The voice of Lisa, the social worker assigned by the court to monitor Ellie's case, interrupted his thoughts. She made monthly visits, observing Ellie's adaptation and assessing Damon's household. "Sure, come in," he replied, indicating the chair in front of him. Lisa sat down, adjusting her red-framed glasses while consulting her notes. "The re-evaluation hearing is scheduled for next week," she began. "I need to inform you it will be a more rigorous process than when you were granted temporary custody." Damon nodded, waiting for her to continue. "The court has appointed a full multidisciplinary team. You and Ellie will be interviewed separately. There will be additional psychological evaluations, and a deeper investigation into your background and your capacity to raise a child with complex trauma." "I understand," Damon replied, managing to keep a neutral tone despite the tension building in his shoulders. "We'll do whatever is necessary." Lisa hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Damon, I must be honest. Despite Ellie's obvious progress and the excellent environment you've provided, there are concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "Well, the traditional profile the system prefers for adoption or permanent guardianship is not yours. Typically, it's established families, couples with prior experience raising children, more conventional people." "You're saying I'm unsuitable because I'm single?" Damon asked, a hint of challenge in his tone. Lisa sighed. "It's not my personal opinion. My reports have consistently been positive, as you know. But the evaluation committee and the judge may have reservations: your relative youth, the fact that you're single, your lack of prior experience with children, your demanding work routine." "Which I've completely adapted over the last 6 months," Damon interrupted. "Yes, and that's in my reports," Lisa assured. "But I'm trying to prepare you for the questions that will come up. It'll be intense scrutiny. We don't want any surprises." After Lisa left, Damon remained in his office, gazing at a framed photograph on his desk, Ellie on a park swing, smiling openly, a snapshot taken just a few weeks before. How could he explain to the court that this rare smile was the best proof of his success as her guardian? In the days leading up to the hearing, Damon prepared as if for the most important negotiation of his life. He reviewed every report, every evaluation, every document pertaining to the case. He consulted experts in family law, child psychology, and other adoptive parents. But mainly, he tried to keep Ellie's routine stable. He didn't want her feeling the uncertainty weighing on him. "Why are you awake?" asked her sleepy voice one night, when Damon, unable to sleep, was reviewing documents in the living room. He looked up surprised and saw Ellie standing in the doorway, hugging Mr. Paws. "Just working a bit, sweetie," he said, trying to sound casual. "Go back to bed, it's late." Instead of obeying, Ellie approached, noticing the papers spread out on the table. "They're about me?" she asked, recognizing her name on one of the pages. Damon hesitated, then nodded. They had an unspoken rule of always being honest, even when it was hard. "They're for the court hearing," he explained. "Remember we talked about it? It's when a judge decides if you can stay with me forever." Ellie nodded, serious. Then, to Damon's surprise, she placed a small hand over his. "It's going to be okay," she affirmed confidently. "Ms. Lisa said you're the best new dad she's ever seen." Damon smiled at the term Ellie had invented for him. He wasn't her biological father, so he was her new dad. "She said that, huh?" "Yup, she thought I wasn't listening." Damon felt a surge of gratitude for the social worker and her quiet support. Maybe the system wasn't entirely against them. On the day of the hearing, the family court was especially busy. Wearing his most conservative suit, Damon held Ellie's hand as they walked to the assigned room. Helena Martinez, his lawyer, waited at the entrance. "They're all in there," she said in a low voice. "The full evaluation committee, plus Dr. Phillips as an independent consultant, and Judge Henderson." "Any surprises we should know about?" Damon asked. Helena hesitated. "We received last-minute notification. A distant cousin of Ellie's was located in another state. She's not seeking custody, but the fact that there's living biological family could influence the decision." Damon felt Ellie tighten her grip on his hand. He glanced down, seeing her eyes widen. "I don't know any cousin," she said quietly. "Don't worry." Helena knelt to speak at Ellie's level. "No one can take you away if you don't want to go. The court always considers what's best for you." When they entered the room, Damon was struck by its oppressive formality. Unlike the smaller hearing for temporary custody, this was a proper courtroom. Judge Henderson presided from a high bench, while the evaluation committee, a psychologist, psychiatrist, senior social worker, and family law specialist, occupied a side table. Lisa gave them a discreet smile from her seat near the committee. Following protocol, Ellie was gently guided to a separate room by a child psychologist. There, she would undergo her own interview away from the pressure of Damon's presence. "It'll be fine," he whispered to her, bending down for a quick hug before she left. "Just say what you feel, like we practiced." Ellie nodded bravely, though her lower lip quivered slightly. With Ellie out of the room, the real interrogation began. "Mr. Acosta," began Dr. Rivera, the committee's psychiatrist, "over the past 6 months, you have provided a stable environment for Eleanor, and reports show significant progress in her development. However, we have concerns about the sustainability of this arrangement." "What concerns, Doctor?" Damon asked, striving for respect in his tone, despite the rising tension. "You're a single, relatively young man with no prior experience with children and a highly demanding career," she explained. "Eleanor has complex emotional needs stemming from severe trauma. Her recovery will require years of consistency, patience, and emotional availability." Another committee member, Dr. Marcus, a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma, leaned forward. "Mr. Acosta, do you realize what it truly means to raise a child with Ellie's history of trauma? Behavioral difficulties can manifest unpredictably in the coming years. Nightmares, regression, attachment issues, possible academic problems. The initial phase you've experienced could be the easiest." The word easiest made Damon clench his fists under the table. Nothing in the last 6 months had been easy. The sleepless nights after nightmares, the seemingly inexplicable crying spells, the moments Ellie withdrew completely, reliving terrors she could barely name. Then he remembered the other moments. Her first genuine laugh, the first time she let him braid her hair, the day she ran into his arms after school, instead of waiting timidly for him to approach. Damon took a deep breath and looked squarely at the committee. "I don't know everything," he admitted, surprising even his lawyer with his candor. "I'm not naive enough to think I fully understand what Ellie went through or what she'll still face, but I do know what she means to me." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I found Ellie, I was a different man. Someone who measured worth in numbers, who saw people as statistics. Because of her, I changed everything. My routine, my priorities, my worldview. I learned to be patient when I never was. I learned to listen when I always preferred to speak. I learned to put someone else first, for the first time in my life." Judge Henderson, who had been quietly observing, gestured for him to continue. "Mr. Acosta, we understand you've formed a bond with the child, but this court must consider her long-term best interests. How do you plan to balance your demanding career with Eleanor's ongoing needs?" "I've completely reorganized my company to prioritize Ellie," Damon replied. "I've delegated responsibilities, cut down on travel, implemented remote work so I can be available. I created the Aurora Foundation, inspired by her, and now we run our social projects together. She comes with me, shares ideas, learns about helping others." Helena stepped in, providing concrete details. "My client reduced his workload by 60%, instituted remote work 3 days a week, and transferred 40% of his executive responsibilities to ensure he's available for Eleanor." The hearing lasted nearly 2 hours. Every aspect of Damon's life was scrutinized: his childhood, past relationships, physical and mental health, finances, educational plans for Ellie, strategies for handling her trauma. When Ellie returned, escorted by the psychologist, she looked tired but calm. She held a new drawing in her hands. "Eleanor was very participative in our interview," the psychologist explained. "She expressed herself mainly through drawings, as is her habit. She asked to show this one to the court." Judge Henderson gestured for the drawing to be handed to him. He examined it for a moment, then passed it to the committee. Damon caught a brief glimpse of it, a picture of Ellie and him holding hands outside the home they now shared. Above them, a large, smiling sun. In the corner, Mr. Paws looking on. "Eleanor," the judge addressed the girl gently, "would you like to say anything to the court?" Ellie looked from Damon to the judge, then to the committee. Her voice was small but firm. "I want to stay with Damon. He promised he wouldn't leave me, and he never breaks his promises." The silence that followed was tangible. "Mr. Acosta," the judge said, "do you have a final statement?" Damon stood, heart pounding. He had prepared a careful speech with Helena, supported by data and verifiable commitments. But looking at Ellie, at her trusting, hopeful eyes, he knew no scripted statement would suffice. This wasn't about calculated arguments. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folder. From it, he took some of Ellie's drawings from the past months, the earliest ones just hesitant scribbles, the latest, more detailed pictures of them in the park. "Your Honor, members of the committee," he began, his voice more earnest than he'd ever used in a courtroom. "I could list all the changes I've made, all the resources I can offer, all the guarantees I can provide. But the simplest truth is this." He paused, meeting the judge's gaze. "She saw me when I no longer saw anyone. When I walked through the world blind to others' suffering, she made me stop and look. She taught me how to love, to pause, to care." Damon handed the drawings to the judge, who studied them intently. "I never planned to be a father. It wasn't in my vision of success, but she chose me that night out of all the people who passed by that alley. And I won't let go." His voice wavered on the final sentence, cracking under the emotion he tried to contain. "These drawings show our journey, from a girl who barely trusted enough to hold 3 of my fingers, to the child who now runs to meet me at the end of the day. I'm not perfect. I'm learning every day. But I promise to keep learning, adapting and growing for her." The silence was profound. Even Helena seemed surprised by the raw emotion in Damon's statement, normally so composed. Judge Henderson examined the drawings a moment longer, then set them down carefully. "This court will consider all evidence presented today, as well as expert reports and Eleanor's interview," he announced formally. "Given the complexity of the case and the need to thoroughly review every aspect, I'm reserving my decision for a new hearing in 1 week." As the judge left and the committee members gathered their materials, Damon felt the weight of uncertainty settle over him. 1 week of waiting, 1 week of doubts. Ellie approached and took his hand naturally. "So you spoke so nice," she said simply. Damon managed a smile despite his apprehension. "I just told the truth." As they left the room, Lisa drew near discreetly. "That was good testimony," she whispered. "The drawings, that was a brilliant touch. It's the purest evidence you could offer." "It wasn't calculated," Damon admitted. "They're the only documents that really matter to me." Lisa nodded, understanding. "The committee is rigorous but fair, and Judge Henderson, formal as he may be, prioritizes the child's well-being over conventions. But the outcome is still uncertain," Damon said, voicing the fear consuming him. "Yes," Lisa agreed, as honest as always. "But if you want my personal opinion, in 6 years on this job, I've never seen such a positive transformation in both child and adult. That counts for a lot." Leaving the courthouse, Damon looked at Ellie walking beside him, her small hand firmly in his. He noticed how she now walked with her head held high, how her steps were more confident, how she no longer flinched at every unexpected noise. Whatever the final decision, that transformation was real, and it was worth fighting the entire system for. The week leading up to Judge Henderson's final decision was the longest in Damon's life. Every phone call made his heart skip. Every new email raised hopes, then dashed them when it wasn't news from the court. By day, he maintained a facade of calm for Ellie's sake. By night, when she slept, he allowed himself to consider the unthinkable. What if he lost? On the eve of the final hearing, his lawyer, Helena Martinez, called. "I just spoke to the judge's clerk," she said, barely containing excitement. "I can't confirm anything officially, Damon, but I think you should prepare a celebration for tomorrow." Damon felt a wave of hope, but refused to embrace it fully. Years of corporate negotiations had taught him that nothing was certain until the final signature. The next morning, he helped Ellie into her favorite dress, blue with small embroidered butterflies. Mr. Paws wore a makeshift bow tie of matching ribbon. The drive to the courthouse was quiet. Damon struggled with his anxiety, while Ellie gazed out the window, absent-mindedly stroking the bear's scorched ear, a gesture she made when nervous. The courtroom felt less intimidating this time. Maybe because they knew the layout, or maybe because Lisa had arranged for them to arrive early and get comfortable. When Judge Henderson entered, everyone stood. He scanned the room briefly before his gaze settled on Ellie and Damon. After the opening formalities and the reading of final reports, The judge cleared his throat and began his verdict. As stated by child welfare guidelines, this court must always prioritize the best interest of the child. We have thoroughly evaluated the environment provided by Mr. Acosta, the progress Eleanor has shown, the emotional bonds formed, and the stability of this arrangement. The judge paused, adjusting his glasses. It's true that Mr. Acosta does not fit the conventional profile favored by the system. However, this court cannot ignore the substantial evidence of Eleanor's significant improvement under his care, physically, emotionally, socially, and academically. Damon felt Ellie squeeze his hand so tightly it almost hurt. Therefore, it is the decision of this court to grant permanent guardianship of Eleanor Santos to Mr. Damon Acosta, with a favorable recommendation to begin full adoption proceedings should both parties wish to pursue it. The words hung in the air for a moment. Permanent guardianship, legal confirmation of what his heart had known for months. Beside him, Ellie looked confused by the legal terminology. "What happened?" she whispered. Damon knelt to her level, tears already welling in his eyes. "It means you're staying with me. Forever, if you want." Ellie's face lit up, and then something rare and precious happened. A smile that started small and grew until it took over her whole face, until it reached her eyes, until it became a laugh that filled the formal courtroom. Ignoring protocol, she threw her arms around Damon's neck. "Forever," she repeated, as a statement of fact. After wrapping up paperwork and exchanging congratulations, they left the courthouse. But instead of heading straight home, Damon took an unexpected turn. "We have an important appointment now," he said as he drove. "What appointment?" Ellie asked curiously. "One we've postponed while waiting for the judge's decision," Damon replied with a mysterious smile. "It's a surprise." 20 minutes later, they parked in front of a traditional uniform shop. Ellie's eyes widened when she realized, "It's for the new school?" she asked, her voice a mixture of excitement and nerves. During the provisional custody period, Ellie had received tutoring at home. The decision not to immediately enroll her in a formal school was recommended by psychologists to help her adapt and catch up academically. "Yes, for the Rainbow Institute," Damon confirmed. "You start on Monday." The school had been carefully chosen. A small institution with a personalized approach, well equipped to support children with past trauma. Inside the store, a sales assistant greeted them, having already set aside the required items. Navy blue skirt, white blouse, sweater with the school emblem, white socks, and black shoes. "You can try them on in the fitting room, sweetheart," she said kindly. Damon waited patiently, checking a few emails on his phone, when he heard the fitting room curtain open. He looked up and felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. Ellie stood fully dressed in the uniform. The navy blue contrasted with her now healthier, longer brown hair. Her new shoes gleamed. The sweater fit snugly on her small shoulders, no longer bony after months of proper nutrition. But most striking was the expression on her face. She regarded her reflection with a mix of surprise and wonder, as if seeing someone else. "How do you like it?" Damon asked, once he found his voice. Ellie turned slowly, checking every angle. Then she looked at him, her eyes reflecting a question that went far beyond the uniform. "Am I like the other kids now?" she asked, her voice revealing how important that question was to her. The question hit Damon like a punch, like the other kids. Normal, belonging. Everything she wanted after being singled out by abandonment and survival on the streets. Damon knelt in front of her, gently adjusting the collar of her new blouse. "You're better than anyone I've ever known," he answered with utter sincerity. "And this is just a uniform. What makes you special is right here." He lightly tapped her chest, where her heart beat. "Your courage, your kindness, your strength. That's what really matters. But yes, you look like a perfect student in that uniform." The smile she gave him in return felt like a ray of sunshine after a long winter. They bought all the necessary items, extra uniforms, notebooks, pencils, backpacks. Ellie insisted on carrying everything herself, though she could barely manage the bag's weight. Her pride in her new status was clear. Sanisdam's mark of the next morning, the first one in which Ellie was legally Damon's beyond question, both woke earlier than usual. Although school wouldn't start for days, Ellie asked to wear the uniform for a walk in the park. To get used to it, she explained seriously. Lisa said it's good to practice new things. Damon made a special breakfast, pancakes shaped like animals, a skill he'd recently acquired from single-parent cooking tutorials online. After breakfast, they walked hand in hand to the nearby park. Ellie, perfectly dressed in her uniform, kept glancing up every few steps to confirm Damon was still there. A habit that had lessened over time, but still appeared in important moments. "Do you think I'll make friends?" she asked as they crossed the grass. "I'm sure of it," Damon replied. "Who wouldn't want to be friends with someone as amazing as you?" Ellie considered his answer, serious. "But what if they ask about before, about the fire and the street?" Damon paused, sitting down on a nearby bench and motioning for her to join him. "You only share what you want to share when you want to share it," he explained. "Your story is yours, Ellie. You decide who deserves to know it." She nodded, absorbing his words. "But I can tell them about you," she decided, "how you found me, and about Mr. Paws." "Sure," Damon smiled. "That's an important part of our story." They sat there for a while, watching other children play. Damon noticed how Ellie observed them closely, analyzing their interactions like an anthropologist studying a new culture. "It'll be fine," he assured her, squeezing her hand gently. "And I'll be with you every step of the way." Ellie smiled, her gaze now less apprehensive, the beginning of a new future for them both. Beneath Masamnas, in the months that followed, life found a new rhythm. The Aurora Foundation expanded, opening 2 additional facilities. The assistance programs, modeled in part on Ellie's original ideas, received national recognition for their innovative, empathetic approach. Ellie adapted surprisingly well to school. After an initial phase of shyness, she blossomed academically and began forming a small circle of friends. Her teachers often commented on her remarkable empathy and maturity. The official adoption was finalized 6 months after Damon was granted permanent guardianship. In a simple ceremony, Elena Santos officially became Elena Santos Acosta. To celebrate, Damon hosted a small party with the people who had been pivotal in their journey: Lisa, Helena, Dr. Torres, Carlos from the diner, and a few of Ellie's classmates. The biggest change, however, happened in Damon's professional life. Gradually, he delegated more, cut back on non-essential projects, and reshaped his schedule to be present in Ellie's daily life, helping with homework, attending school recitals, or simply spending a Sunday afternoon doing puzzles. Damon worked less. He lived more. On a random Tuesday, returning from a meeting at the foundation, he found Ellie focused on the living room table, surrounded by colored pencils. She was fully absorbed in a drawing, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. "What are you drawing?" he asked, setting his briefcase on the sofa. "It's a surprise." "You can't look until I'm done." Damon respected her wish, occupying himself in the kitchen preparing dinner. When Ellie finally called him over, she proudly presented her creation. It was very different from her early drawings. The lines were more confident, the proportions more realistic. It showed Damon and Ellie sitting on a park bench, the same bench where they had talked about school. Above them, a big yellow sun smiled down, towering trees offered partial shade, and at the top of the page, in careful child's handwriting, a single word: home. "It's to hang in the living room," she explained. "So everyone who visits can see it." Damon looked at the drawing, feeling that familiar pressure in his chest, not pain, but a fullness that sometimes felt too big to contain. "It's perfect," he said, voice thick with emotion. "We'll put it in a frame." That night, after reading Ellie a bedtime story and tucking her in, Damon lingered by her door, watching her. The room, once impersonal, now overflowed with personality. Posters, books, drawings, a growing collection of stuffed animals, though none as treasured as Mr. Paws. Later, sitting alone in the quiet living room, he looked at the newly framed drawing. Home. Not the luxury apartment or the prestigious address, but the feeling, the belonging, the certainty that, wherever they were home when they were together. That was when Damon fully understood. Ellie was the daughter he never knew he wanted, and the best decision he had ever made in his life. Looking back at the man he had been before that night in the alley, Damon barely recognized him. That man, so obsessed with acquisitions and wins, would never have understood that his greatest triumph wouldn't be measured by bank digits or business headlines, but by the hesitant smile of a child learning to trust again, and by a simple drawing of two people holding hands beneath a smiling sun at home. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.